Good evening and welcome to the Kuhn Academy for this installment of AP US History, where we're not just learning history, we're making history. Hi, this is Mr. Kuhn coming to you from my new studio. Not really, but I got my new microphone, so hopefully this is a little better than a wee rock band. All right, so we're going to talk about the causes of the Civil War, mainly secession, all right, which I think it might already be up there, but if it's not, we should get secede or secession up on the word wall because that is critical to understanding the Civil War. All right. Now, obviously, one of the still debated topics in American history is what caused the Civil War, and we know that it was obviously slavery, and that's a huge question there. But it was really secession that caused the Civil War. The fact that the South wanted to break away, form their own country. Now, what caused secession was obviously a lot of the issues over slavery, precipitated by Lincoln's election and so on. All right. So in class, hopefully we get through some of the years of the 1850s, and in your text you read up to the start of the Civil War with secession and things. So we're going to kind of pick that up here. So if you look at the election of 1860, all right, we see the solid South yet again here voting overwhelmingly for John C. Breckinridge, the candidate from Kentucky. You'll notice the numbers here are the percentage of the vote that he got in each of the states. You'll see John Bell from the Constitutional Union Party winning these middle states here, okay, and Texas, which was a little confusing. We'll get into that a little more later. Douglas winning Missouri, which would make sense because of a stand on popular sovereignty, and then Lincoln overwhelming winning in the North. So, with that, the South decided that they could not live in a country with Lincoln as president, and they wanted to get out before he became president. Didn't even want to give him a chance to run. So, with Lincoln's election, we see the Deep South secede. Deep South would be these states right in here. Okay, the Upper South in here has not left the Union yet. Okay, neither have these border states, as we're going to refer to a little bit later. Okay, so what happens is we see a phase of secession between 1860 and 1861 to form the Confederate States of America. By definition, when we secede, we withdraw from membership in an organization, association, or alliance. And as is the case with the 11 Confederate States, it's to withdraw from the Union of the United States. All right. As I told you, there were two distinct phases. Phase one was the 7 states of the lower or deep South, as we're going to call it, went out by February of 1861. Now, you got to remember, Lincoln is not elected or inaugurated until March 4th of 1861. So there's about a 4-month, what we call lame duck period from the time that he's elected to the time that he's inaugurated. Okay, so President Buchanan is running the country at that time, and these southern states felt this was the time to go. All right, I'm going to give you the order of secession, but it really isn't that relevant other than knowing that South Carolina goes first. We've seen South Carolina threaten to secede after the nullification crisis, but nobody wanted to go with them. Here they followed through with that. And December 20th of 1860, they formally withdraw from the Union, thus starting essentially the Civil War by breaking away. All right, the next state to go is Mississippi a couple weeks later. And incidentally, South Carolina and Mississippi happen to be the only 2 states in the Confederacy with more African Americans in the population than whites. So you can see how slavery was kind of an issue there. We'll hopefully read in class as well the Mississippi Ordinance of Secession, which will clarify their exact reasons for leaving. Third state to go would be Florida. All right, now the Florida you and I know is down in here with Mickey Mouse and Shamu and everybody else, but the Florida of back then is really just in here, and that's the Panhandle, which is just a few plantations and a little bit of agricultural areas. But now this is all vast swampland that really has no use until we put an amusement park down there. All right, next to go is Alabama. This is where we're going to put the provisional, which means temporary, provisional, good word for the word wall, provisional government of the United States or Confederate States, and that will be in Montgomery, Alabama. And they'll elect Jefferson Davis to be their president. Georgia will go next, okay, still in January of 61, followed by Louisiana. And then the final state to go in 1860 is Texas, marking the second time that they have seceded, first from Mexico and then from the United States. Okay, so these 7 states are going to form the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis is president. Montgomery, Alabama is their capital, and the Constitution that they're going to write, which will be obviously very similar to the U.S. Constitution. This is an interesting map. If you want to pause your video and take a look at it, it kind of tells a different story than what we showed in the first map where we just saw these whole states seceding. All right, you'll notice the pink are the areas that voted against secession. So this was not a uniform decision by most of the states, with the obvious exception of South and North Carolina. Okay, you'll notice Virginia was this entire state right here. Notice most of Western Virginia was against secession. So what's going to happen in 1863? West Virginia is going to secede from Virginia and become their own state. You'll also see most of eastern Tennessee doesn't secede. This is mostly mountain country, a lot of yeoman farmers, most notably Andrew Johnson, future president of the United States. And I'm sorry that that happened. Also, this area up in the upper part of the Cotton Belt there in Alabama and Georgia didn't secede as well. Again, not as fertile of a region, not as agricultural, therefore not as dependent on slave labor. Okay? Now, the Congress obviously didn't want to see this happen, so they did make a last-ditch effort before Lincoln's inauguration, the word I'm looking for, sorry. Before Lincoln's inauguration, they passed an amendment, which, as you know, amendments must pass the House, Senate, and then be approved by the states. This actually did pass the House and Senate, and this basically would have been the 13th Amendment, stating that no amendment to the Constitution can give Congress the power to abolish or interfere with, in any state, the domestic institutions thereof, translated slavery, including persons held to labor or service of laws of said states. So this would have basically guaranteed slavery forever in the Constitution. Naturally, the states didn't go along with it, and civil war became inevitable. Now, where does this justification of secession come from? Okay, well, it comes from the doctrine of what we call state sovereignty. All right, we've hopefully talked about popular sovereignty already. If not, you filled out the note card at least. Basically saying that this union was a confederation of sovereign, independent states that had complete control over their affairs. The federal government was just the agent that got the states together and gave very limited powers to that government. And they said that individual states retained that sovereign power and could leave the union the same way they entered it. So if they entered the union by calling for a convention, they could leave by calling for a convention. Okay, that was their justification. Now, incidentally, Jefferson Davis, who was going to be arrested, obviously, at the end of the Civil War, demands, if not begs, to be put on trial for secession, wanting to argue these exact facts by saying that it was his constitutional right and he wasn't committing treason. He was, in fact, exercising his right as an American and following the Declaration of Independence that they could leave the Union in the event it became destructive. Okay. Now, the northern view of secession, mostly Lincoln's, was that the Union was sovereign and perpetual. It was eternal. It could go on forever. That the states gave up that rights when they joined the Union. Sorry, there's no T here. Okay. When they joined the Union, right, they gave up that sovereignty. The legal right did not exist, and it was a revolutionary act of defiance against the Constitution and the Union, which basically justified the war to put it down. So following Lincoln's inauguration, there's an attack on Fort Sumter. We will talk about this on Thursday, hopefully. And following that, which are the first shots of the war, Lincoln asks all of the states, including those in the upper South that have not seceded yet, to raise a 75,000-man army to put down this insurrection. And 4 states of the upper South, Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, decide they're going to leave the Union because of that. So this is the second phase of secession, creating the 11 Confederate States of America. The final slide here talks about what we call the border states. Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, West Virginia will be thrown into that mix, and Maryland. Maryland's not on the slide here, but they remain in the Union. However, they're slave states. All right. So Missouri and Kentucky were actually claimed by the Confederacy, and that's why their flag has 13 stars, because they wanted them to secede also, which would have strengthened the Confederacy, but they never were able to muster up the votes to secede. These will play a very important role in the Emancipation Proclamation later, because Lincoln has to keep these slave states from seceding while still trying to free the slaves at the same time. All right, so I hope this helps explain secession a little bit and the ultimate causes of the Civil War. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Kuhn Academy. Remember, we're not just learning history, we're making history.